For 2 years, a large country has been an experiment. Not very long ago, Argentina had debt, in which situation it had the highest inflation in the world and the crisis that lasted for an eternity. At present, the figures have been adjusted. Argentina lenders are willing to lend money to Argentina, and the future looks quite different. And the changes are only because of this man, Javier Milei, the most extravagant president in the world. He owns cloned dogs, speaks to God, and made his sister the first lady. He insults his opponents, countries in general, and even the Pope. But Milei's also the world's first libertarian president. He brought a plan of radical reforms, made a promise to save the country, and made the whole world talk about the Argentine miracle. And after 2 years, it seems that he is working his way through. But there is another side to this story. Why do most people in Argentina think that things have only deteriorated? Which test is the president going to face? What is really going on in a country that was supposed to be an example to the rest of the world? And most importantly, who is Javier Milei really? A genius or a madman? Javier Milei grew up in the 1970s. Time was tough for him and the country as well. Argentina was constantly going through a crisis, and the family of Milei was not spared from the effects of it. His dad was a bus driver. Javier was an introverted and lonely boy. He only had one person that was close to him, and that was his sister, Karina. Apart from that, his early years were characterized by violence and fear. His father used to beat the kids and say to Javier that he was nobody. Milei would keep these words with him for life. He quit talking to his parents, never referred to them in his speeches, and even said that they were dead to him. He didn't have many friends at school. He was into only music and football. He played as a goalkeeper and was a member of a band that did covers of the Rolling Stones. On stage and on the pitch, Milei became a completely different person. He could start dancing during recess, copying Mick Jagger's moves. As a keeper, he'd dive for the ball headfirst, shout, and provoke opponents. Maybe that's just how Argentine goalkeepers are. The point is, his mates named him El Loco, which means crazy, not the nicest nickname for a child. But later on, Milei would convert it into his brand, his identity, and that nickname would lead him to the top position in the country. He didn't win elections just because he was acting strangely, but because he actually had a plan. So first, another passion appeared in Milei's life. The 1980s have arrived. The country was changing. Democracy replaced the military junta, but the economy kept deteriorating as well. Pricing of goods went up, and people didn't have access to fuel or food. Javier noticed all of this and started following the news. Later, he got into economics by himself. He came across an entire school of thought with a theory that was in total contradiction of what was happening in the country. Argentina had been on a path of heavy social spending since World War II. This was the idea of Juan Perón. The entire system operated on the principle that the state pays and the state allocates funds. Not even moderate and right-wing politicians couldn't change it. But Milei got to know the ideas of anarcho-capitalists. These are people who believe the state shouldn't exist at all, and therefore neither should public money. Only a free market where people take care of their problems themselves. Milei was enthralled with these ideas. He went on to become certain that this was the only way that could rescue Argentina, and therefore he only immersed himself in economics. Milei turned into a university professor, had academic papers in his name, and wrote books saying that Argentina's time was running out and only libertarianism could be the solution. He found his purpose through economics and made it his life's work. Otherwise, his life would not have been very successful. Milei's story revolves around his relationship with people, and these relationships were difficult for him. He's 40 years old, he has no wife, no friends, and he doesn't talk to his parents. Milei was a workaholic, and this dog was the only companion he had besides himself, an huge mastiff named Conan. Argentines love dogs in general, but Conan was not only a pet. Milei called him his son. In the toughest periods of his life, he says that only Conan was there with him. He would save on his food just to buy more for the dog. Together, they rang in the new year. He gave Conan champagne, and once a fire broke out in the apartment, Milei says he nearly died because he didn't want to leave until Conan was safe. But besides the dog, nothing. His anarcho-capitalist ideologies that he lived by were not liked by many. To be honest, even even now, Milei's books are not that popular, and back then, in a country where the state was very present, Milei was proposing to eliminate the state. People found it difficult to take him seriously. Here is the best example: Milei's first TV appearance, April 2015. Just a few years later, Milei wouldn't need to introduce himself. Everyone would know him. But back then, it was the most boring broadcast imaginable. Milei listed his achievements, books, articles, but no one was interested in hearing about anarcho-capitalism. A year after, Milei came to TV again. This time, his manner was completely different. He attacked the authorities and made it a real show. What people liked was the fact that Milei was so different. Milei was everywhere, talking about economics, dogs, or sex. It doesn't matter at all. The main thing was to be the center of attention, and he knew what audiences liked. El Loco was no longer an offensive nickname. It was a brand. Milei is gaining popularity. His sister Karina is now his manager. They staged an economics performance in which Milei told audiences the reasons for their troubles. They started a TV show. Milei went to talk shows. He was very vocal in his opposition of the government. At that time, moderate left and moderate right were in power, but still everyone received the same treatment from Milei, though the focus was not on politics yet. Javier Milei was merely a brilliant guest whom the viewers liked, and he gave very clear explanations of economics. Due to that, he became a real star. But that was the public side of the story. The greatest tragedy of his life was happening backstage. He found out that Conan had cancer. It was a severe blow, and to handle it, he decided to clone his dog. If you clone an animal, you can't decide how many dogs you will get. It's a matter of chance. Most of the time, it's 1, sometimes 2. Very rarely, it is 3. Milei got 5 dogs, and he didn't want to let any of them go, so he named them after the economist he liked: Milton, Murray, Robert, Lucas, and the other one, Conan II. Around that time, the moment when Conan died and Milei cloned the dogs, the other, more mystical side came into his life. He visited a medium and started having telepathy sessions where he would talk to Conan. Later, his sister started doing such sessions as well. In interviews, Milei claimed that the supernatural things happened to him. He told friends that he and Conan were together 2,000 years ago in the Colosseum. He started to talk a lot about God, comparing Karina to Moses and himself to Abraham, saying that God is a libertarian and that Milei has a critical mission. Just to clarify, all of this is according to sources. However, there are a lot of them, so you cannot just overlook this part of Milei's existence. You will realize for yourselves that he is a big fan of both symbolism and the supernatural. But the most interesting thing is that cloned dogs, tarot cards, and talking to God didn't have any negative effect on his public image at all. On the contrary, even greater popularity was to come later. Argentina was hit very badly by the pandemic. The quarantine lasted 2 years. Everything was closed for months. It was very difficult to go outside. There were no tourists. The GDP fell. Inflation increased. People were very unhappy. Everybody was without jobs and money, and they were just watching videos online. In 2020, Milei came out with the film Pandonomics. He said that the lockdowns were what communists dreamed of when they wanted to take control of the population, and at the end, he broke a model of the central bank with a hammer. Not long after, Javier Milei made it known that he would be running for elections. He wanted to be a deputy. His slogan, "Long live freedom, damn it," it was 2020. That was the exact moment when TikTok became the new way of life for everyone. Milei turned out to be the perfect hero for social media, a politician of a new format. To a certain extent, people were jokingly calling him a meme, while some took him as their idol. At this point, he was far more popular than his TV appearances. He was walking down the streets and people were stopping him, but he was not letting them pass. His rallies were no longer political. They were real shows. Javier Milei has become a rock star. The very first election of his life ended in triumph. The new party managed to secure 2 seats in the parliament in their very first try, like a bolt from the blue, and El Loco is now one of the people elected politicians. However, he always said he wasn't after a position or a seat. He went into politics to crash the old system and change Argentina. The things are macroscopically different now. Before long, everything would come to look totally different, even the country's leadership that didn't suspect it yet. As a deputy, Milei wasn't very active. He was hardly a participant in parliamentary life. But at that moment, he made an important acquaintance, without which there would be no libertarian president, no reforms in Argentina, and not even this video. he met Santiago Caputo, a mysterious young man, little known, who almost never appears in public, doesn't give interviews. He is noted for having dark sunglasses and a prison-style tattoo in English that reads, "A house, a dacha, a savings account, a boat, a car, and a garage will calm my blush." As a matter of fact, the Caputo family is quite a prominent one in Argentine politics, and Santiago is a young, talented political strategist. Before that, he had the chance to work with different candidates in various countries, and now he is evaluating the potential politicians in Argentina. Caputo doesn't like the whole wolfish agenda. He even goes a bit libertarian with his ideas. After that, meeting with Milei was such a surprise for him because he understood his personality perfectly. This time, it wasn't a lie. Javier Milei made it known he was running for president and carried the campaign a bit differently. To be honest, Javier was still with the same old song and dance of anarcho-capitalism and the free market, and even mentioned that he will abolish the central bank and switch to the dollar, which in turn would stabilize the economy. This is where the famous chainsaw appears. But Caputo fine-tuned his image and cranked it up. Now Milei wasn't just a showman or just an economist. He was a fighter against corruption, injustice, and the entire state system. Milei called it the caste. That was the key word of his campaign. He promised to make Argentina great again. And the more old politicians criticized him, the higher his rating went. Because Javier Milei was different. He became a voice of everyone tired of those in power, and after decades of constant crises, there were plenty of such people in Argentina. Even his controversial biography didn't hurt him. Cloned dogs, mediums, and conversations with God. In Argentina as a whole, esotericism is quite popular, so a real myth formed around Milei. He said heavenly forces sent him, that he came to wake the lions. It went beyond that. He was not an economist, but a hero. Quite a number of people gathered around him, and for them, Milei was not a candidate, but a prophet, a savior. Milei secured 56% of the vote. He won the election, the first libertarian president in the history of the world. And in his victory speech, Milei only referred to two people.
Gracias a mi hermana Karina, porque sin ella nada de esto hubiera sido posible. Además, también quiero agradecerle a ese gigante que me ha acompañado a lo largo de todo este proceso, ese gigante que suele mantenerse en la oscuridad, que se llama Santiago Caputo y es el verdadero arquitecto de esto junto al jefe.
The state was now headed by an anarcho-capitalist who believes that this very state should be destroyed. 10 years ago, no one wanted to listen to his ideas, and now the whole country had become his laboratory where he could test the entire theory in practice to see what will come of it. At that time, Argentina was in a very difficult situation. There was triple-digit inflation, 40% of the population was below the poverty line, and the state was heavily in debt and practically without any reserves to service it. Milei started his campaign with the slogan, "There is no money." The main task was to cut spending. In his very first week, he closed half of the ministries, canceled subsidies and transfers to regions, and started privatizing state companies. In total, hundreds of different reforms to steer Argentina onto free market rails. Some promises had to be abandoned. For example, talk of switching to the dollar has almost disappeared. The central bank remained open, and Milei, who had once been insulting the IMF, ended up taking its money in the end. Still, these were truly bold reforms, and they delivered results. Inflation fell several-fold. The state had money again, and the currency became more stable, and investors trusted Milei's project. They stopped withdrawing money and selling pesos. So if you take a look at the figures and indicators, the situation is much better now. However, ordinary people were the ones who suffered the most from such measures. The authorities slashed pensions, transport, gas, water, and electricity became very expensive. Utility bills increased by hundreds of %. Children and pensioners are the most vulnerable groups that suffer. Universities literally don't have enough money to pay for electricity. Argentina has become the most expensive country in Latin America. 80% of residents say they've started buying less. Half of the population cannot cover their monthly expenses. The number of homeless people has gone up by 25%, and Argentines have also reduced beef beef consumption drastically. That is a very significant indicator because Argentine beef is a big part of the national culture, but many people simply cannot afford it. Consumption is at its lowest since 2001. Milei cautioned that the situation would be tough initially, that his reforms resembled the letter V. At first, it gets worse, and then it gets better. The only question is, when exactly? Are people willing to wait? And does Javier Milei have that time? Because he's not only doing politics. El Loco hasn't gone anywhere. He's now the president. Milei hosts Instagram live streams from his office and is living in the presidential palace with his dogs. He even has their pictures painted on his scepter. All this, of course, is very helpful for the image of a new kind of politician, but some believe that the president has turned managing the country into a show. Milei is very active on X. Elon Musk is a good friend of his, and in Argentina, they have even created a site that tracks how many tweets and retweets Milei does in a day, and his tweets are full of aggression. He attacks dissenters, especially the press. Milei doesn't tolerate criticism. He says journalists are liars. He has already closed the state news agency, accusing it of leftist propaganda. In the press freedom rankings, Argentina has fallen by 50 places under him. Everyone who criticizes the authorities is a traitor. Such politics has never led to anything good, and Milei is waging a real culture war. Statistics show his supporters are mainly white men, and Milei's views align with other right-wing politicians around the world, from the US to El Salvador, from Italy to Spain. Milei travels abroad a lot. He's criticized for it being pretty expensive. But at the Davos forum, Milei was able to say that the West is in danger because of radical feminism and neo-Marxists. And it seems Javier Milei has come to believe strongly in his mission, which is now about saving civilization. This caste that must be destroyed isn't just the old politicians anymore. It's everyone who's against Milei. Talk has begun about political traitors, and Argentina had a dictatorship not so long ago. Many remember it, and Milei, by the way, denies the crimes of the junta. He says there weren't 30,000 casualties, and in general, all that was necessary collateral damage. We're talking about a regime that literally threw people from helicopters into the ocean. But the main danger for Milei is something completely different. In his very first days as president, he repealed the law that prohibited appointing relatives to high positions and appointed his sister Karina as the head of the administration. Until recently, she was learning tarot cards and selling cakes on Instagram. It is not overstating the case. And now she is in charge of the whole agenda. She appoints ministers, and she is running the party. In Argentina, a system has been created under which Milei refers to the Iron Triangle. It's him, Karina, and Santiago Caputo. Caputo still stays in the shadows, but he became an advisor. And to give you a sense, Caputo can, for example, interrupt the president's interview without asking and step into the frame. And the country's economy minister, Luis Caputo, is his cousin. Maybe the Iron Triangle is an effective scheme, but the system of costs and the counterbalances wasn't just invented for nothing, and most importantly, it's his close associates who could ultimately ruin his career because the biggest scandal of his entire time in power recently erupted. In September, the media leaked wiretaps of officials talking about Karina Milei bribery in exchange for government contracts for medicines for sick children. Milei denies everything, but officials were fired just in case, and searches were conducted at their homes and at the editorial offices. Now, his beloved sister, the most important person in his life, could become his biggest problem, as Milei had built his entire image on fighting corruption and being different. They were confidently overtaken by the Peronists, the very same people whom Milei had once supported. He promised to remove him from power. He himself called it a serious defeat and promised to do a better job. And you might think, so what if they lost in one region? But 40% of the country's voters live there, and most of them wanted to bring back the left. And on October 26th, Argentina held parliamentary elections. Peronists, the very ones that Milei promised to oust, were able to overtake them with confidence. But in the national midterm elections on October 26th, President Javier Milei's party, LaLibertadAvanza won a decisive victory, securing just over 40% of the vote, compared with roughly 31 to 33% for the Peronist opposition. This result gave his party a much stronger position in the legislature than before. By elections, half of the deputies were changed, and Milei himself said it would be a referendum on his confidence. However, you cannot go very far like that. If you want to change the system, you have to change the laws, and for that, you need deputies. And this is the point where the El Loco image starts to be disadvantageous to the president, because if you say that everyone around you is an enemy, no one will support your reforms. So, this election acted as the gauge of the next 2 years of President Milei, the way his libertarian experiment will turn out, and whether Argentina would become, as he had promised, a model for the whole world.